Okay, so I think we'll get started now. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever in the country you might be. My name is Norm Bailey-David. I'm going to be joined shortly by Monica Helgoff, and so Monica, you can chime right in as soon as you're ready, and we'll get started with this webinar.
Perfect. Thank you, Norm. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. My name is Monica Helgoff, and I'm the VP for Talent Map's Western business, and I'll be hosting today's session. Change is an inevitable part of human existence, and in the context of the workplace, change has the power to impact employee engagement either positively or negatively. Talent Map's Senior Vice President, Norm Bailey-David, will be exploring how to manage employee engagement in the face of major organizational change. Before we get started, I just want to cover off the agenda and a couple of housekeeping items. So how we're going to approach this topic, we're going to spend the first 5 minutes exploring why the topic. The next 10, we're going to look at what happens to engagement when organizational change is poorly managed. Following that, we're going to explore why so few seem to get it right. And then we're going to be looking at some key success factors to make change happen more smoothly and to ensure better employee engagement. Finally, we're just going to leave about 5 minutes at the end to take your questions. To submit a question, just have a look at the right-hand side of the screen. You'll see the chat feature there. You can submit your questions at any time during the presentation, but we do have that 5 minutes at the end reserved to address the questions. Copies of the presentation and a link to the webinar will be posted on our website in about a week's time. So just a few background slides on Talent Map for those not familiar with our work. We have been in business for well over 15 years, so our sole focus is really on workplace measurement. So we have thousands of employee engagement surveys since inception. We've surveyed well over 1 million employees, and annually we run at least 500 employee engagement surveys. And we also do other specialty workplace surveys, including safety surveys, entry and exit surveys, pulse surveys, and so on. Just wait for the next slide. It's a little slow. There we are. So we do work in a wide variety of industry sectors. Our benchmark spans virtually every type of industry. We work with companies as small as 50 to well over 100,000 plus, predominantly in the North American market, but also we are expanding our business globally. So we do work on the technology and engineering side. We work with not-for-profits, public sector entities, so all orders of government, health services, financial services, and a variety of industry sector clients. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Norm, and let's hear from him about how we can manage employee engagement better with change.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Monica. I'm hoping everybody can hear. If you can't, for some reason, please send a question or chat through. From our end, it looks like that we are live. So I'm going to keep going until I find out otherwise. But the first thing is it's really interesting in terms of how we choose our topics for these webinars based really on what we're hearing in the boardrooms, what we're hearing from our clients in terms of what really is sort of what are some of the underlying issues when we're talking about engagement. So some of you, judging from the registration lists, have been on a number of webinars, so you know the types of things that we're talking about. But why in particular organizational change? And I think the best way to explain this is to sort of put you in to one of our one of my many conversations with our clients. So it usually goes something like this. So the client usually pulls me aside, or very early on in the engagement, sort of as a sort of a semi-whisper. I need to give you some context here. We're probably a different case because we either have just gone through, or are going through, or going to go through some sort of significant restructuring or transformation or change. So, and everybody says this the same way, so we're probably not like your other clients, or we're probably different, or we're probably a special case. And they warn us right away that engagement in their specific organization is probably going to be a challenge. And of course, I hear this from just about every single client that we deal with, and because change is really, as you know, to use the well-worn and well-known phrase, change is the only constant. And every organization, almost every organization that we're working with, starts us off with this type of conversation where almost comedically they think, or you think, and I guess in many cases, that you're the only ones going through this type of change. And it's really interesting from our perspective to see so many different clients that are thinking that they're alone in this, when nothing could be further from the truth. Just about every organization we're dealing with is at some part or some stage in the change management process. And that's what I want to really talk to you about today, because what we also see is there's so few that get it right. And really, you know, I'm not going to give a lecture or a presentation on change management. There's plenty of literature out there in terms of how to conduct change. There's books and books and books written about it. But what I am going to do is discuss the impact of change on engagement and some of the things we can do and we can coach our managers to do a little bit better within the framework of a change management program to get it right, to do it a little bit better. So let's start with what happens to employee engagement when we have an organizational change that's not managed very well. So some of you who are clients of ours will recognize some of these slides, at least generically. Of course, we mask the individual clients. Not that they're very different, they're very, very similar in many cases. So as you would expect, when there's a change program in place, ongoing, upcoming, or even just finished, which is very rare, engagement goes down. More often than not, actually, we've never seen engagement go up as a result of the change management. We've seen engagement recover after change management, but we've never seen change management actually cause for a rise in engagement, with one exception, and I'll talk about that particular client without naming them, of course, a little bit later on. But as you can see here, engagement goes down, and it can often go down dramatically or drastically. In this case, it went down 12 percentage points, and it's also below our benchmark, and it usually sinks down below the benchmark. So as you would probably expect, when change is ongoing, engagement goes down. Why is it going down? Well, the first reason why is because one of the key engaged attitudes that people have that drive engagement, that are behind engagement, is optimism in the future. Employees and everybody, not just employees and management alike, need to have a positive outlook about where their organization is going, because it's an outlook as to their role in that organization. So when change management happens in the way I'm going to be talking about, more often than not, optimism goes down. It doesn't have to, but the way it's managed is causing for that. And I'll get into more details in a few minutes in terms of why it's happening. So optimism goes down, and if optimism is going down, engagement goes down by definition. Here's the real crux of the issue, and this is really the theme that we're going to be talking about mostly, and that is what we call the sense of place. And what happens in many, many organizations that are undergoing change is that employees start to lose their sense of place. And why do they lose their sense of place? Because they don't know what the change is going to bring. Notwithstanding communications and emails, internal newsletters, management discussions, etc., for whatever reason, employees are losing their sense of place. And when they lose their sense of place, they lose the link between what they do as individuals and where the organization's going. So if they cannot see that link anymore, you start to see what's happening here in this bottom bar happen, which is people don't agree with this statement, but they don't disagree either. And what that basically means, people are on the fence, and that points to uncertainty. They're not sure, they don't know, and when we have uncertainty, we have basically a foundation that becomes unstable. Think of a foundation in an earthquake. It starts to shake, and we don't know where to stand, and that's exactly what's happening emotionally with employees in an environment of change. Okay. Also, and quite dangerously, as you can see, and now this is, I'm not masking this data, by the way. These are actual data points. These are slides taken from organizations who have done engagement surveys either during or, at the cusp or the tail end of change. And we can see here, look at this here, we can have attrition that can reach dangerous levels. In this particular organization, which was quite large, more than 500 employees, almost half, 1 in 2, every second employee was thinking of looking for another job or looking for another job. So when that's the case, obviously it's not just the employee now that's on shaky ground. When you have so many people uncertain of their future and what's going on, then you actually have a substantial risk that's introduced into the organization. So it's not just many senior leaders sort of, they brush aside employee concerns about uncertainty and not knowing the future and come up with phrases like, yeah, we all have, change is the constant, like I showed you before, or we all have to live in uncertainty, those types of brush-offs to employees. But they're also putting themselves and yourselves at risk when they do this, because if that level of uncertainty reaches a certain point, you're going to see a situation where you can see a substantial number of employees leave, your attrition go up, and of course that is going to introduce a lot of instability in the organization, and with all the problems those high levels of attrition can bring. So it's not just bad for the employee, it's also bad for the organization. So what else happens? Well, many of you who've done engagement surveys with us will know that oftentimes the key drivers to engagement, they tend to be similar. They tend to be things like professional growth. They tend to be things like the leadership team, organizational vision, things like that. When we see a change process that's not managed very well, the change itself now becomes a driver of engagement. What do I mean by that? Well, what that basically means is, first of all, we have to measure that change to actually identify it. And our client interlocutors, the HR folks that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, understand that when their organizations are going through change, they want to get a little bit of a grip on how people are feeling. And sure enough, when we ask the question, and I'll actually show you which questions are inserted into our surveys momentarily, when we ask that question, we start to see that other things fall to the wayside. Things that would normally be very dramatic drivers of engagement, things like teamwork and innovation, fall to the wayside because now there is this preoccupation with change and the uncertainty that's coming along with change. And when people are more certain, when people understand the change, when they're behind the change, then they're more engaged. And of course the converse is true, which makes it a driver of engagement. And you also see the corollary, especially here, of organizational vision, which is the future of the organization, where the direction of the organization, and that also becomes a driver as it's correlated with feelings about the change. So it becomes an issue in and of itself when we're talking about engagement. So we actually have to turn our attention to the change and focus it more on that and leave things like teamwork, innovation, which actually will come back after once the change issues are largely resolved, if they're ever resolved. So what I want to do now is try to explain and give you my observations in terms of sort of the hundreds of clients we see on a yearly or biannual basis, why so few are getting this right. And then I'll talk to you about the exception of the 1 or 2 organizations that did get it right and what they're doing. And it really is it's a corollary. I mean, if you do certain things, you'll get it right. If you don't do certain things, you don't get it right. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about now. So why do so few get it right? Well, here are the questions. So when we're looking at the impact of change management on engagement, these are the things that we're actually measuring. Now, those attitudes come from the concerns and the behaviors that change management literature and expertise and experience will dictate that are important in terms of managing a change well. So the first thing is understanding why the change is needed, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the burning platform concept in a minute. Convinced that the change is necessary, that a confidence that the organization can execute that change successfully, being motivated to change themselves as individuals, and having the tools, the training to actually adapt to the change. And in this particular client example, you can see that whereas it might have started out reasonably well, as the change moved forward, this particular survey was done in 2014, last year. So there's a 2-year gap, and you can see that as the change took hold, some of these things dropped off dramatically. When we're talking about why they're getting it right or not getting it right, the confidence that the organization can execute successfully takes a hit. And most often, it tends to be things like giving the coaching, the tools, the training necessary, and most importantly, the communications. Oftentimes, what clients do get right is they communicate very, very well at the outset of the process. And we see that here, understanding why the change is needed. So they communicate well at the outset of the process. So some clients get that right. But what happens is as the process takes hold, now implementation, the change actually starts to happen, gets implemented and executed. The communications about why the change was needed in the first place, and more importantly, where we're going with the change, takes a back seat, or if it doesn't drop off completely, in favor of operationalizing the change. So we move from explaining why to explaining how, and then forgetting about the why. And why that's dangerous is because of attrition and new people coming on board. They see, okay, well, we're changing this to this, and this is how it needs to be done, and this is when it needs to be done for, and this is what you have to change. But the message about why is being lost. And that's really key, and this is actual examples taken from our clients that we're talking about. So the other thing I'd like to show you in terms of understanding why few are getting it right is to, as you know, in our surveys, we pull a lot of verbatim comments. And in that question about change management that you see here before, we also ask people to input what can be done better in terms of the change. And I've pulled out a number of key examples of the key themes or recurring issues that tend to take place in our clients when a change is going on. So the first one is quite telling. Recognizing that we cannot be privy to all decisions, I would like to feel that the change is not something I have to accept, but rather something I can also input to. People want to have an influence and a control or some semblance of control over their daily lives as opposed to having it imposed on them. This is particularly true as the generations change and the millennials take on more importance in our organization, but it really is universal. We need to have influence in terms of what's going to affect our daily lives. And so often change, when it gets to the operational level, it's an imposition as opposed to a consultation. And this is what employees are talking to us about. Communicate change and reasons for change well before the change is made. For example, dissolving field service without telling area offices. So often there's gaps in communication, and I'm going to really drive home that point in terms of how the communications angle of this is really where the ball gets dropped more often than not. And it's not on purpose. It really is something that is just almost either poor planning or, more importantly, just sort of benign negligence, for lack of a better phrase. So opportunity to have training and coaching, so a better sense of our upcoming role. So what's going to happen, need some clear direction on where the company is going. Hard to trust in senior leadership when restructuring happens, when there's change. So obviously you have all of these things happening, but if you can see, there's really one underlying theme to most of these comments, which has the outcome in a lack of trust, is communication. transparent, honest, open, vulnerable communications. And when we get to communications, we start to see why so few are getting it right, because for us, I think as HR practitioners specifically, most of us are probably middle managers of some sort. We understand, and it's, you know what, you're probably thinking, well, the answer to this is communications. I knew that. Yes, knowing it is one thing, paying lip service is another thing, but in actual fact, what we see, what we observe on a day-to-day basis when we're looking at how change is implemented in organizations and why engagement is taking a hit is because most leaderships, most execs are actually doing the opposite. Even though they're paying lip service to the word communication, they're actually managing change through secrecy. Now that sounds completely oxymoronic, but it actually happens. And let me tell you how. First of all, there's a bunker mentality that starts to take place when we're entering into a change management or a major change especially. And many senior execs want to be able to communicate, many managers want to be able to communicate all the answers. They want complete certainty and essentially to provide the recipe. And the result is, if we can't say everything, we end up saying nothing. Very rarely will an organization come out ahead of the game and give a partial response in terms of where a change is headed, why the change is needed. So they say nothing. And there's also, it's almost, I forget the word, but essentially there's a thrill of being in the know on this. There's a sense of self-importance that, yeah, I know what's going to happen, but others don't. And I get some sort of charge out of that. It's completely dysfunctional, but it actually subconsciously and even consciously in many cases, many managers who are part of the change and change direction get a thrill about being in the know. And because they get that thrill about being in the know, that causes some elitist behavior in terms of, if I'm in the know, not everybody can be in the know, because then you're not in the club anymore, right? So perverse as that might sound, that's the word I was looking for before. Perverse as that might sound, it actually is true. And I think the two that we encounter the most often is, and it really relates to the first point, is a fear of the rumor mill. So let me give you an example. So we're about to make a major restructuring in terms of how a multinational organization reports different divisions into the headquarters. So before there used to be a regional reporting, and now we're going to an overall corporate headquarters with regions basically changing reporting structures, and then there's going to be changes within. And before, that's going to mean, usually it's going to mean some moves and some layoffs. So because execs are so fearful of releasing partial information or no information, they fear the rumor mill. So they don't want the gossip and the rumors to get ahead of them. They don't want false information to spread. So funnily enough, the way to stop false information is to stop all information. And what they don't realize is, in the absence of any communications, employees will make up their own. And this we see constantly. So in the absence, and we even see it on engagement survey results, when they're kept quiet too long, employees will start to communicate amongst themselves that the results must be bad because they're not getting any information to the contrary. So actually, when employees start the rumor mill going, the information that starts to circulate is actually worse than the true information which should have been communicated further. But because of that rumor mill, managers and leaders manage change through secrecy. And then only there's that big and splash announcement, but by that time the rumor mill has picked up, the uncertainty is through the roof, and all of those symptoms that I showed you before and impacts of engagement have already taken place. Finally, many execs really assume the reasons for change, so this is about the why part, that they've been talking about this amongst themselves and in small groups for so long that they make the assumption that it's self-evident why we're changing. For example, if business is dropping off in a particular organization, they realize, well, everybody can see that. Why do we need to focus so much on why? It's obvious. So they go right to the how and what's going to change and how it's going to change. And they lose focus on that why it's changing message. And I love this particular quote because it's so rare out there. But if we could show this to our leaders, if you could take one slide from this presentation and show it to your leaders and say, this is the way we need to do change management in our organization. This is it. Just basically saying, I don't have all the answers. I need your help, your guidance, your leadership to tackle the challenges before us. And what does that do, essentially? How is that different from what I just explained? Well, most leaders want to have all the answers. And saying they don't have all the answers is an admission of weakness or vulnerability. And it's that vulnerability that causes them to act in secret, that causes them to wait for all of the information, which we'll never have, before providing communications and direction. And the vulnerability in terms of asking for employees' help and guidance and their leadership to tackle the challenges before us. So that really is, it takes a lot of confidence to admit that vulnerability in an environment of change. Yet Bill Richardson is the type to do that. Now, of course, not all leaders are going to automatically admit that vulnerability, and therein lies the challenge. But that's basically what it boils down to. All right. The other thing here, and the way to figure out if this is the issue, I call it the boardroom bunker. You can see for yourself, and you can actually now, with this information in hand, you can go to your leaders and say, this is the way you're behaving with getting off on the wrong foot. We need to change tack. We need to hear, look what Bill Richardson did. So are your leaders spending more time in meetings with each other than in their teams? We often see that. Are they less and less visible or accessible to teams, to employees? That's a common complaint. And when that happens, even in the largest organizations, visibility doesn't necessarily mean face-to-face. Visibility can mean by blog, by video. It could take many, many forms. But just being less visible, less accessible because they're caught up in these internal meetings about how we're going to change. Are they avoiding answering questions about impending restructuring, layoffs, strategy shifts, or worse yet, are we feeding them talking points? Or is somebody in internal comms feeding the leaders talking points about the change rather than talking from the heart? If that's happening, then everybody's going to be seeing through it. And basically, you might as well put up instead of a glass showing transparency, you put up a brick wall, because employees will automatically see that as an us versus them, and that's going to increase the uncertainty. And of course, you can see the thrill, the ones that do get that thrill by being in the know, being in that inner circle that I showed you before. So that's really what's going on in terms of why so few get it right. So just to summarize before I get into some of the ways we can address this. And so first of all, employees don't understand the reasons for change. They don't understand the end state. So what are we looking for after the change? They don't have the opportunity to influence the change. The leaders are less visible and less communicative precisely when employees need the opposite. And really what all that boils down to is the uncertainty. And uncertainty kills engagement. It also does a lot of other things, but primarily in this context, it kills engagement. So without getting into, we could give entire courses on change management and what are the components and how to manage it. And that's not obviously what I can do with you today in a 40-minute webinar. What I want to do is point out really how do we address some of these issues, especially amongst the senior leaders? How do we make them aware of how, their knee-jerk reactions in terms of managing change, because the change literature is out there. But what we see from our perspective when we're measuring and managing engagement with our clients is we see this stuff still going on in most organizations undergoing change. So what are some of the key success factors now to doing it right? The first one, remember I'm talking about communicating the why. There's something in change management, many of you may have heard this term. I've also used this term in my own presentations. It's called, I didn't invent it by any measure. It's a common term used in change management. It's called the burning platform. And the burning platform, visualize what that means. It means providing a compelling business case, in the strongest terms, the need for change. In other words, you got to have, if you're going to change individually, you got to have a reason to jump. You have to have that reason that you cannot stand there anymore. It's impossible. You need a reason to take a leap of faith, and that's what the burning platform is. And so often, organizations start on the wrong foot by assuming that either A, people understand and take, it's obvious why we need to change, or B, they shift directly into, this is what we need to change, this is how we need to change, this is how we need to measure change. But everybody forgets about telling employees why we need to change and reinforcing that why and creating that burning platform. So if you don't have the burning platform, you're going to resist the change. Clear as day. The second one, and this comes right from a combination of academic research, but I think what touches me personally more about this is the way we see it appear in our surveys. So in this particular organization, and many others that are undergoing change, the trust in the immediate managers, so the people who have direct reports up the line. In actual fact, in most organizations, it's the middle management core. It tends to be very, very high. And that really means that we need to understand, A, that that's where the trust lies. And we often tend to, when we do communicate, we tend to communicate in corporate messaging, in organization-wide messaging about change, but we forget that the most credible source of information on change management and undergoing change is someone's boss. Why is that? Because they're role models. I'll skip that. I'll come back to that yellow box in a second. And employees, they don't necessarily listen to their supervisors. They watch their supervisors intently because they're skeptical of their boss's commitment to change. And if the middle management core is not committed to that change, which we see so often, then obviously the employee takes their cue from that. So the middle management might be spouting off the talking points and the lines, but in their actions, they might not be committed to that change, and they're skeptical of that commitment. So we need to get the middle managers on board, and obviously the middle managers operationalize that change. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing is we got to get leaders to get out of the bunker and out of the boardroom. And in one actual case where this actual client, I've showed several slides from this particular client who was undergoing a change. They actually changed tack. So they went through a couple of years. The change management proved disastrous from an engagement standpoint. The results came out clearly that they needed to get their middle managers better on board, and the way to do that is to get their input. And especially how to manage change in their particular areas, you need to open it up. You need to communicate, and the thing is you need to take the risk and convince leaders that the risk of not telling them and not getting them on board because of the rumor mill is actually outweighed by the risk that these folks will not accept the change if it's imposed, or they don't have input. So what that basically means is to open up the change strategy and the management of that, and communicate and be transparent with the middle managers, as many as we can, get their input. It takes a little bit longer, it takes a lot longer sometimes, but if we want the change to work, they've got to buy in, they've got to be part of it, and then they will serve as the proper role models to employees. So if the employees will say, well, yeah, I really trust Joe, and if Joe's on board with this, it's probably a good thing. And that's the reasoning that has to take place. So we need to get our middle managers on board early in the process. Okay. And I made reference to this particular point before, and often once we get into a change, and a major change at that, which takes place over several years, our communications and implementation focus takes over, and we start, if we ever did in the first place, communicating what we call the end state. So the first slide, or one of the first slides I showed you, was about, seeing a clear link between what the individual does and the organization's long-term objectives. So what we need to be doing with employees, if we're talking about restructuring and layoffs, most importantly, because they're the employees that are staying, are key here, is we need to articulate to the best of our knowledge what the end state is going to look like. And another word for that is vision. Right? So you saw vision and change management are very, very closely linked from an engagement perspective. So employees will not resist change as much, and maybe might even embrace change if they can understand what we're heading to in terms of, and communicating the picture of the end state. What will we look like in 3 to 5 years? Let's paint a picture. Our organization will be such and such. It'll look like such and such. We'll be good at such and such. And to do that, we need to change these things. So if people can understand that, then they're much more likely to buy in. They're much more likely to start to look at adapting their own process if they can see the end state. So the burning platform is at the outset, why the change? The end state is what after the change. If we can communicate that very, very clearly, get our middle managers on board with that, then the likelihood that we're going to overcome resistance is a lot higher. The blowback you're going to get from senior leaders on this is that, well, we don't know. We don't know what we're going to look like after the change. Who's going to tell us where we're going to look after? There is no after the change. Pardon the typo there. And really this is really fiction, because there really is no after the change. Change is constant, right? But it's aspirational. So we can set a target, and by target I mean very aspirational target here. We can define what we want to look like in pretty detailed terms. We want to be the best at something. We want to be better than our competitors at something. We want to be doing. We want to be more productive. We want to be. We can articulate that kind of vision. We can communicate and get people to buy into that kind of vision. It very much is like the brass ring. We'll always strive for it. We'll never quite attain it, but we'll strive anyway if we buy into it. It's probably apropos, without getting into to politics too much. We can use a political analogy here, because good politicians, if we look at Barack Obama and remember Barack Obama before in the 2008 campaign, he did that extremely well. And if we look 8 years later, well, they're nowhere near the brass ring. Never will be. But that articulation of let's aspire to something got people very, very involved, enough at least for the Democrats to win 2 terms. Same here, same in any organization. If we can provide that end state, that aspiration, we're much more likely to get people on board. And the fact that we're not doing it is one of the key reasons why there's that uncertainty, which manifests itself in lower engagement. So, roles for everybody. There's different roles in change that have to be articulated at a very, very high level. Again, this is much better and much more detailed in the change management literature. But from what we can see, there's a role for the leader, there's a role for the manager, and then there's a role for the employee, of course, as well. Leader's role here is to evangelize the change. What do I mean by that? I mean they have to be able to, for lack of a better word, preach and really live, demonstrate by walking the talk. And a good example of that is being the first to live with a temporary inconvenience that a change is going to bring. One of the most effective change managers that I've seen over the years in their organization, especially when they were doing IT restructuring and process improvement. The IT changes that they were talking about, in other words, they were moving to a new platform, which would take a little bit of a mental leap. It wasn't quite ready for prime time, but the leader was the first to live with that inconvenience and showed people that, yeah, okay, it's a little bit more tougher to do it this way, but we're working on it. And because the leader did it that way, then that basically put the onus on everybody else to follow. So if they're the first to live with a temporary inconvenience, so often we see, yeah, the rest of you have to do it that way, but we're going to do it the easy way until it's ready. Then they're not walking the talk. Share the vulnerability. Be Bill Richardson is really the leader's role here, and include subordinates, particularly the middle managers, in continuous improvement. I also see one big mistake in terms of, okay, we shoot for that end game in terms of the change, but we get so invested in what that looks like that we're not open to changing as we go, making minor improvements to that. And we need to adopt a spirit of continuous improvement, that especially as employees start to implement the different changes, that they'll have some good ideas and, okay, well, we weren't thinking of doing it quite that way, but if it's better, let's do it that way. And not being dogmatic in terms of, okay, what's my way, this is the way we need to do it, this is the way the boss said to do it, we can't deviate from that. So there's another thing that we're talking about. The manager's role, if the leader's role is to evangelize, the manager's role is to operationalize. They've got to do the problem solving around this. They've also got to share the vulnerability, and they've also got to include the subordinates in continuous improvement. An employee's role is really embrace the idea of change, yes, and of course with the proviso that it's communicated in the way that I've been talking about up till now, burning platform and state, but question the modality. Question, is this really the best way to do it for me? And share those ideas for continuous improvement. Have an open mind, of course, and we need to counsel and coach that they shouldn't expect all the answers at the same time. There is going to be that period of uncertainty, but if we're willing to share the vulnerability, we can manage that period of uncertainty much better. So on that note, I'm going to close. I'm going to turn it back over to Monica. While she's talking about this, I urge you, if you haven't already, to, if you have questions, to enter them in the question box. Given the time, we do probably have a minute to answer a few of those. So I'll let Monica take us through where you can see a talent map in the coming months. And while she's doing that, I urge you to ask a question or two. Monica?
Well, thanks so much, Norm, for the information. That was really interesting. So a few events where Talent Map is going to be at. If you're in Eastern Canada, we'll be attending the Ontario Municipal Administrators Association event, where we'll be talking about emerging practices, the economic development transformation. We will then be moving over to Las Vegas in October, where we will be attending an event for HR technology. Then next will be at People Analytics Canada from October 27th to 28th. And of course, we have our monthly webinar series that I encourage you to continue to take advantage of. Next one up, October 29th, how to improve engagement through better teamwork. And finally, we will be at the Canada's Top 100 Employer event from November 16th to the 17th. So I'll let you take the mic, Norm, and just let us know if you have any questions received yet.
Yes, I've got a few here. So I will, there's a couple of housekeeping questions. Yes, you will have access to the PowerPoint. What we do is we're actually recording the session as well as a webinar, a webcast. So within a few days, we'll send you a notification as to when that's available on our website, both just the PowerPoint and the recorded webcast as well. So that's the housekeeping. So how to fix after a poor launch of change? Well, the best way to do is what I would call a nuestra culpa, or mea culpa, for if it's in one individual. And that basically means acknowledging that, yeah, we got off to a poor start in our communications. convening a number of groups of employees to understand where they think we got it wrong, and then to start, to re-communicate that burning platform. And when I say communicate, this is where internal comms people do play a key role, because there's so many different vehicles that we can use effectively. And in many organizations that are large, we can't communicate face-to-face, town hall type with everybody often. So we need to do this in as a personalized manner as possible, but at the same time, we need to reach everybody. So when I say mea culpa or nuestra culpa, that's the best thing to do. That's the showing the vulnerability piece. And just by doing that, you're going to start to open people's eyes. So that's, and then of course you have to diagnose or do the diagnostic in terms of, you know, what actually went wrong in the minds of employees. So next question, how do you balance transparent communication and protecting organizational confidentiality, especially when information is leaking to competitors, customers, suppliers, etc.? Yes, indeed. You have to play a fine line, but unfortunately, what we see happening is the leaders and managers err on the side of secrecy and not on the side of giving too much information. And the result is everything I just talked about over the last 40 minutes or so. So we do need to take our middle management core and provide them a modicum of trust. It's going out on a limb. It's explaining, you know, the sensitivity of the information that they're going to get. But that, remember, the thrill of being in the know. Well, it works that way as well. So people will they'll get a charge out of the fact that they've been trusted. You know, we need to take some safeguards to prevent leaks, but at the same time, we need to get those people on board. And the lack of information, so not doing it, erring on the side of secrecy, is actually more risky, because what tends to happen is the leaks happen, but they're rumor, so they're not actually factual, but externals might take it as factual. So that's how, if I were in those shoes, that's how I would balance the risk. I think it's the substantive questions. We have a lot of, do we get the PowerPoints after type of questions, and so that's it. That's the questions we have. On that note, then, Monica, I'll let you give it the final word.
Yes, thanks so much, Norm. And again, do be sure to join us for our regular monthly webinars where we cover off different topics related to engagement. Thank you so much for your participation today.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.